they trusted them with their lives. Families left their loved ones in their care, never suspecting that behind their calm smile hid a deadly secret. They all were no ordinary nurse, they were experienced in their field, but they became most prolific serial killers in history. Their weapon? The very medicine meant to save lives. Subscribe now to Unbelievable True Story, because sometimes the ones we trust the most are the ones we should fear. Number 1. Charles Cullen, the Angel of Death. Charles Edmund Cullen was born on February 22, 1960, in West Orange, New Jersey. His early life was anything but easy. His father died when Charles was just a baby. Then, when he was 17, his mother was killed in a car crash. The trauma shook him deeply. That same year, Charles dropped out of high school and joined the Navy. But even in the Navy, something seemed off. Charles attempted suicide several times. He claimed to feel lost and out of place. After being discharged for mental instability, he found a new path, nursing. He enrolled in nursing school and graduated in 1986. Many thought he'd finally found his purpose, helping others. They were wrong. Charles Cullen began working at St. Barnabas Medical Center in Livingston, New Jersey. At first, everything seemed normal. He was quiet, kept to himself, and did his job. But beneath the surface, Charles was already beginning to unravel. It started small. Charles began tampering with 4 bags. He would add insulin or digoxin, a powerful heart medication, into the fluids. Patients began dying unexpectedly. Their deaths were often blamed on natural causes. No one suspected the soft-spoken nurse. When a hospital investigation started to close in, Charles did what he always did, he left. Quietly. And started again at a new hospital. This would become a pattern. Over the years, Charles worked at 9 different hospitals. Each time suspicions arose, he'd resign or be quietly let go. But none of the hospitals reported him to the authorities. Why? Because they were afraid of lawsuits. Afraid of bad press. So Charles slipped through the cracks, again and again. And the bodies kept piling up. Charles Cullen never chose his victims based on age, gender, or condition. Sometimes they were elderly. Sometimes young. Some were recovering well. Others were critical. But one thing remained constant, none of them were expecting to die when they did. He used drugs like digoxin, insulin, and epinephrine, medicines that, when given in wrong doses, can stop a heart instantly. And he always worked the night shift. Less staff. Fewer questions. More time alone with the patients. One hospital reported that after Charles began working there, the death rate tripled. Yet, somehow, he was never caught. He was transferred. Or he quit. Over and over again. Like a shadow that moved silently through the system. In 2003, Charles began working at Somerset Medical Center in New Jersey. It was here that his killing spree would finally come to an end. A patient named Reverend Florian Gall died suddenly. An alert doctor noticed something odd in his blood work, digoxin levels were through the roof. But Gall had never been prescribed digoxin. Nurses and staff began whispering about Charles Cullen. Then came another death. And another. The hospital finally contacted the New Jersey Poison Control Center. Together, they began to track medication logs, timestamps, and patterns. A nurse named Amy Loughran, a close friend of Charles, was brought in to help investigators. She wore a wire. She talked to Charles. She listened. What she heard would chill her forever. Charles confessed. He spoke of mercy. He claimed he was helping people. That they were suffering. That he was easing their pain. But that wasn't the truth. On December 12, 2003, Charles Cullen was arrested. At first, he was silent. But over time, he began to talk. And talk. He confessed to killing at least 40 patients. But investigators believe the real number could be over 400. Let that sink in. 400 lives lost in silence. Charles claimed he was ending suffering. But many of his victims weren't even in pain. Some were about to go home. Others were recovering well. There was no mercy. Only murder. In 2006, Charles Cullen was sentenced to 11 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. He is now in a maximum security prison in New Jersey. Charles Cullen's case rocked the healthcare system. How could one man move from hospital to hospital, leaving a trail of death, and no one say a word? New laws were introduced in some states. Hospitals became more alert. Background checks were strengthened. Whistleblower protections were improved. But for many, it was too late. The families of the victims still grieve. They trusted the system. They trusted the nurse. And that trust was betrayed. Number 2, Beverly Allitt. The nurse who was trusted with children but became their worst nightmare. Imagine taking your child to the hospital. They have a small cough, a little fever, nothing serious. The nurse says, "Don't worry. I'll take care of them." But hours later, your child is dead. This is not a horror movie. This is the true story of Beverly Allitt, the nurse who killed children and no one saw it coming. In 1991, Grantham and Kesteven Hospital in England had a children's ward. It was quiet. Safe. Parents trusted the nurses. One nurse stood out, Beverly Allitt. She was 22, soft-spoken, polite. She wore her uniform neatly and smiled often. But behind that smile was something dark. Liam Taylor, just 7 weeks old, came in with a simple chest infection. Beverly promised to take care of him. Hours later, Liam's heart stopped. Doctors saved him, but then it stopped again. This time, Liam died. His parents were shocked. But doctors said it was just a tragedy. Then came Timothy Hardwick, 11 years old. He had a seizure, but was stable. Beverly took over. Minutes later, his heart failed. He died. Soon after, Becky Phillips, a baby, died of a mysterious illness. Her twin sister almost died too, right after Beverly cared for her. Then Paul Crampton. Claire Peck. Kaylee Desmond. One by one, they collapsed. And Beverly was always there. At first, no one thought it could be her. But doctors started to notice something weird. The kids weren't sick enough to die. Their blood showed high levels of insulin and potassium. Some had air bubbles in their veins. Only someone with medical knowledge could do this. And Beverly had full access. When police searched her home, they found stolen syringes, medical files, and a personal notebook full of strange notes about each victim. The truth was clear. Beverly Allitt was killing children. In 1993, Beverly was taken to court. She faced 4 counts of murder, 5 counts of attempted murder, 6 counts of grievous harm. She barely reacted. No tears. No emotion. Experts said she had Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a condition where someone hurts others to gain attention or praise. Beverly wanted to look like a hero by creating emergencies she could respond to. But she wasn't saving lives. She was ending them. Beverly Allitt was sentenced to 13 life terms. She was sent to Rampton Secure Hospital, a place for criminals with mental illness. She is still there today. She has never said sorry. She has never explained why. Number 3, Janine Jones, the baby killer nurse. In the quiet halls of pediatric care, where innocence and hope filled the air, no one suspected that one of the nurses, someone entrusted with the lives of sick children, was hiding a monstrous secret. Janine Jones, a licensed vocational nurse in Texas, would later be known as one of the most sinister child killers in American history. It all began in the late 1970s at Bexar County Hospital in San Antonio, Texas. Janine was hired as a nurse in the pediatric ICU. She was known for her strong personality and fierce work ethic. But something about her didn't sit right with some of her colleagues. Whenever Janine was on shift, the number of medical emergencies, particularly cardiac arrests, increased. Babies who had been recovering would suddenly crash without warning. Some died. And Janine always seemed to be there when it happened. Still, no one could prove anything. Doctors and administrators began to grow suspicious, but in a move that would haunt the hospital forever, they didn't investigate deeply. They simply asked her to resign. But Janine didn't stop. She went on to work at a small pediatric clinic in Kerrville, Texas. And that's where her killing spree accelerated. Between 1981 and 1982, the small town of Kerrville was plagued by unexplained infant deaths and collapses. Parents would bring their children to the clinic for simple checkups or mild illnesses, and then receive news that their child had suffered cardiac arrest. Once again, Janine was always present. She used powerful drugs like succinylcholine, a paralytic agent that can stop breathing, and digoxin, a heart medication that, in high doses, can be lethal. She would inject these substances into babies and small children, watch as they began to struggle for life, and then try to resuscitate them, sometimes succeeding, sometimes not. Some believe she wanted to be seen as a hero. That she'd poison the children just so she could revive them and earn praise. Others think it was more sinister, that she wanted power over life and death. The horror finally came to light when Dr. Kathleen Holland, the clinic's physician, grew suspicious after multiple mysterious emergencies involving healthy babies. She started keeping detailed records. And on September 17, 1982, 15-month-old Chelsea McClellan died after a routine injection given by Janine. Dr. Holland contacted authorities. An investigation was launched. Soon, they discovered that Janine had forged vaccine records, falsified medical documents, and had access to restricted drugs. Her storage area contained numerous vials of unaccounted-for medications, some of which were only supposed to be handled by doctors. In 1984, Janine Jones was charged with murder and several counts of injury to a child. But prosecutors, fearing they couldn't prove all the deaths due to lack of physical evidence, focused on one case. The death of Chelsea McClellan. She was convicted and sentenced to 99 years in prison. Later, she received a second 60-year sentence for the attempted murder of another child, Rolando Santos. But even then, justice felt incomplete. Investigators believed she may have killed as many as 60 children. Some reports estimate the number to be over 100. Shockingly, in 2018, Janine Jones was nearing mandatory release under old Texas sentencing laws that allowed prisoners to be released early for good behavior. The public was outraged. Families of victims feared for their safety. Lawmakers scrambled to act. Thankfully, new indictments were filed, murder charges for 5 additional children. Janine pleaded guilty to those charges in 2020 and was sentenced to life in prison. She would never walk free again. The story of Janine Jones leaves behind a legacy of pain, heartbreak, and an urgent reminder, even the most trusted figures can hide terrible secrets. Number 4. Jane Toppan, the jolly nurse who killed for fun. She didn't just kill her patients. She wanted to watch them die, slowly. It was the late 1800s. Hospitals were different back then, dim rooms, quiet halls, and nurses in stiff white dresses. People trusted nurses with their lives. They were seen as kind, caring angels in white. But one nurse was hiding something terrifying. Her name was Jane Toppan. And she didn't become a killer by accident. She wanted to kill. Jane Toppan wasn't born with that name. Her real name was Honora Kelly. She was born in 1854 in Boston, Massachusetts. Her mother died of tuberculosis. Her father was known as Kelly the Crack, a man who once sewed his own eyelids shut. Yes. You read that right. Jane was sent to an orphanage. She was later taken in by a new family and given a new name, Jane Toppan. But the damage was already done. Jane grew up learning how to lie, hide feelings, and pretend to be sweet, even when she wasn't. As an adult, Jane trained as a nurse at Cambridge Hospital. Patients loved her. Co-workers said she was cheerful, always smiling. They called her Jolly Jane. But no one knew that behind that big smile, Jane was testing poisons. Literally. She would secretly inject her patients with a mix of morphine and atropine, two powerful drugs. One slowed the heart. The other sped it up. Jane wanted to see what would happen when they were mixed. Sometimes the patients screamed. Sometimes they moaned. Other times they just faded. And Jane stayed by their bedside, whispering to them, watching them die. She didn't kill for money or revenge. She killed because it made her feel powerful. Jane later admitted she got a thrill from watching life leave a person's body. She once said, "It would give me the greatest pleasure to have my patients die with me alone." She would even crawl into bed with some victims as they were dying. Yes. It was that disturbing. Jane moved from hospital to hospital. Each time, more patients died mysteriously. But in those days, death was common in hospitals. So no one paid attention. When hospitals got suspicious, they didn't report her. They just let her go. And Jane moved on to private nursing jobs. There, she began killing not just patients, but friends and even entire families. She killed her landlord, her foster sister, a housekeeper, several friends. One time, she poisoned a woman and then moved into her home. She killed more family members one by one so she could stay in the house. By the end, Jane Toppan confessed to killing at least 31 people. But experts believe the number was much higher, possibly up to 100 victims. In 1901, Jane made one big mistake. She tried to poison an entire family, the Davises. She killed Mattie Davis, then tried to slowly kill her daughter, Mary. But Mary's surviving family grew suspicious. They ordered an autopsy. And that's when doctors found large amounts of poison in the body. Police arrested Jane. And her secret spilled out. When police questioned her, Jane confessed to everything. But she didn't show guilt or fear. Instead, she boasted. She said, "I killed more people than any man or woman who ever lived." She told them it was fun. She even smiled as she talked about death. In court, Jane was found insane. She wasn't sent to prison. Instead, she was locked away in the Taunton Insane Hospital. That's where she stayed for the rest of her life, more than 30 years. She died in 1938. Imagine being cared for by someone you trusted while they slowly poisoned you. Jane was not a monster in the shadows. She laughed. She joked. She helped with medicine. But it was all a game to her. And the prize was your life. Jane Toppan is now remembered as one of the first female serial killers in American history. Not because she hated, but because she loved the power of watching someone die. Number 5, Kristen Gilbert, the killer nurse of Ward C. She wasn't saving lives. She was ending them, just to get attention. In the early 1990s, at the Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Northampton, Massachusetts, strange things started happening. Patients who were stable would suddenly go into cardiac arrest. Nurses and doctors tried everything, but some couldn't be saved. The alarms kept ringing. The deaths kept piling up. And one nurse was always there when it happened, Kristen Gilbert. She was smart. She was kind. She was deadly. Kristen Gilbert seemed like the perfect nurse. Born in 1967, she was described as friendly and responsible. She graduated from nursing school and was quickly hired at the VA hospital. Her co-workers trusted her. Patients liked her. But there was a darkness behind her sweet smile. Kristen had a need for attention. She craved being the hero. She loved the adrenaline of saving lives. But when there were no emergencies, she created them. By making people stop breathing, Kristen started injecting patients with epinephrine, a drug that, in high doses, can cause the heart to race and then fail. It wasn't traceable at the time. It was perfect. After injecting a patient, Kristen would trigger the code blue alarm, signaling a cardiac emergency. She'd rush in with other staff, perform CPR, and sometimes save the person. But too often, the patient died. And Kristen? She became the hero. Again and again. Between 1995 and 1996, the death rate in her ward tripled. When Kristen worked, more than double the number of codes happened. When she was off duty, codes almost stopped entirely. Staff noticed. They called her the angel of death behind her back. Eventually, 3 nurses filed a report. And the investigation began. The hospital quietly started tracking Kristen. They checked records, looked at shift logs, ran tests. And what they found was horrifying. She had accessed epinephrine before every suspicious death. She was present at nearly every code blue in a 7-month period. She had even tampered with emergency equipment. One co-worker said, if Kristen Gilbert was on duty, someone was going to die. But why? It wasn't money. It wasn't hate. It was attention. Kristen was having an affair with a security guard at the hospital. And whenever he worked nights, those were the nights patients died. She admitted later that she would trigger medical emergencies just so he'd rush in, and they'd be together. People lost their lives so Kristen could feel excitement and feel loved. She saw death as a way to play the hero. In 1998, Kristen was arrested for threatening to bomb the hospital, an unrelated charge. While in jail, the murder investigation gained speed. Eventually, she was charged with 4 counts of murder, 2 counts of attempted murder. During the trial, the stories were gut-wrenching. Veterans who had survived war died in their hospital beds because of the person who was supposed to protect them. In 2001, Kristen Gilbert was found guilty. She was sentenced to life in prison with no chance of parole. Kristen Gilbert didn't fit the image of a killer. She was young, pretty, soft-spoken. But behind the scrubs was a twisted mind. She wanted power. She wanted love. She wanted to feel important. And for that, she turned a hospital into a graveyard. You can subscribe to Unbelievable True Story if you are determined to be exposed to a lot of hidden mysteries of great times.